Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. You are joining us at Nestwich Cyber Risk Governance event. I'm Stanley Lee, and you are here also with Sean Mahoney. Hello,
Hey
everyone.
everybody, nice to be live again, Stanley. It's been what, a few months since we did this last.
Well, yeah, we've been busy, as most of you have seen our cyber risk governance group in LinkedIn, and we've been working on a lot of background informations, and hopefully we can share some insightful tips for our governors, technologists, and business leaders. And if you are not familiar with Cyber Risk Governance Group, please check us out in LinkedIn, and you can scan the QR code on the bottom. And at the same time, that yeah, we are trying to bring those three video back up onto our website so you can review why we created this group and who are the target audience, the stakeholders, like I said, the business leaders, the technologists and governors, and why we doing this. Sean, maybe you can share a little bit more background.
Yeah, so we started this group to have a conversation with all the stakeholders. What issues do they face? Where do we see our craft, our trade going as the entire landscape is changing, both from a threat and defense posture? What do we do? What do we do as a community? What do we do as a country? How do we help each other? How do we make this more collaborative and less confrontational, less adversarial, both in organizations and even amongst ourselves? And so you and I have been hosting these roundtables with cyber risk professionals, what, 6 months now or so?
Yeah, yeah, something like
And
that. Yeah.
and we've had some really good attendance amongst these roundtables. They're private, they're small. We don't record them. We don't take notes to say Stanley said this and quote people out. We try to make it an honest and open conversation so we can learn from each other, and so we can share with each other what issues we face, what difficulties at work that others at work may not understand, to try to get some sort of input, feedback, different ideas to help make our job easier. And that's really what we wanted to be able to share, what we've heard from people, and what we think is a good way forward for all of us.
Yeah, so a lot of things that we have talked about just in the last few minutes, and the way in the last about year now, we've been also putting well, more than a year, we've been putting
Yeah.
together the podcast and all this educational focus, and what our mission is trying to accomplish is elevate cognizance.
Right.
And that's the key part of how we enhancing cyber resilience, as we have worked on many years in this. Once we get engaged with the employees, the staff, or the contractors, what have you, and educate them, elevate their cognizance about cyber risk
Right.
and how they governance themselves, it changes the table around. It is such a effective tool, if I may, to bring up the knowledge and awareness about the cyber risk. And that's why we continue to do that. But of course, the landscape has changed at the same time. So why cyber resilience now? All of a sudden, there's network security, cyber security, infosec, all these definitions that has been around. But why
Right.
cyber resilience? And one thing that we gravitate towards is the World Economic Forum, and then looking at the economics and how the cyber risk is impacting
Yep.
everyone, and not just the business to business and who we're targeting, but also from business to business to consumers. And we all need to elevate our cognizance and then help this society to do a better job in cyber resilience.
Yeah, and one of the phrases that
Well,
stood
so
out from
so
the
let's talk about the
roundtables.
objectives first,
Yeah, but one of
Sean.
the things that stood out from one of the roundtables is the title of our conversation today is changing the narrative. One of the people said the real thing is we need to change the narrative, and as you said, we have all these solutions out there, we have all these things out there, but we don't seem to be making a lot of advancements in protecting organizations. So how do we change the narrative so that everyone, all the employees, all the stakeholders, executives and board of directors, they're all on the same page, they all understand what the objectives are to improve that cyber resilience?
Understand. That's the key
Yeah.
word. So I think the way that we easily, well, there was never easy in this topic, but we try, okay? So the easy way to talk about it is, for those three groups of stakeholders, including the staff or the employees, that they don't understand all these technical jargons or governance, which we're going to talk about the acronym war. We just look at it as the efficiency and effectiveness, right? To
Right.
be precise, it is measurable, it is justifiable for the business leaders in the detection and resolutions of
Right.
cyber incidents.
Those are provable.
Yeah, and we have done it.
Yeah.
Well, how Sean, how do we use what we define as two key measurements? Of course, there are a lot more KPI, key performance indexes, on the daily operation. So
Sure.
let's skip the daily operations, which we have been involved with in the last 17, 18 years now, including the IT for my size almost 30 years now. So, what are the key to performance that we keep emphasizing and they helped a lot of customers ours to mitigate this cyber incidents.
Right. We did this with a global organization that we've worked with for a long time. This is how we proved out this theory that the mean time to detection, identifying issues faster within your organization can increase that cyber resilience. And finding those deficiencies faster to remediate them is certainly a more effective way for your staff to spend their time uh, fixing things, whatever it happens to be. And then the mean time to resolution is how quickly things are resolved to put you back on a more stable, secure footing as quickly as possible. And that is, both of those are the ROI there is how effective are you using your resources? It's
Yeah,
always
well,
one of the things we talk
how do you measure it though, Sean? Well, without too much technical information, please.
about. Measure the ROI.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're measuring the ROI for how you're using those resources. You're not wasting the time. So you increase the efficacy of your spend in your budget, in particular, that you're not having to add man hours to your staffing, and you're not having to have your staff there running around wasting time doing things that aren't really doing a whole lot of things that are effective.
That's just the simple part. So,
Well,
during
you
the
told me
last
not to get technical.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm going to lead it into the next question is because, yeah, it's just it's the basic understanding of efficacy, right? So how do we start? That's the, million dollar, billion dollar questions that I've been hearing around the world, that how do I start? Because it's such a complicated issues. I don't want to get into to all the technicality, and which is the daily operations task that we can talk about all those cybersecurity incidents and the deep dive into the technical, but that's not today. So how do I start this cyber resilience or elevating cognizance, all those big word, mttd, mttr? How do
Well,
I start?
you got to know where you're starting from. It's just like if you're going on a road trip, you got to know where you're starting from. I can't make it here from here in Kansas City to you in San Francisco without knowing where I am today in the Kansas City metro area and where you are in San Francisco.
So it's like the GPS, huh?
Right.
Putting the pin drop
You
onto
got to
where you
put a pin
start.
drop. And the problem is that every one of our listeners here and or viewers here, they're all starting from different points. Every organization starts from a different point. Their objective long term is different. Some are complex, some are simple, some are prepared, some aren't. Some have a full tank of gas, some don't. They got to stop by the gas station before they start hit the road. And so you need to understand, where's my starting point? What's my baseline? And if you can establish a reasonable baseline that everyone can agree to, you can then set a path forward, to get to where you want to go, to achieve the business objectives, to achieve your cyber resilient goals.
Are we there yet?
No, it's a long journey, unfortunately. But along this way, unfortunately, laws are going to change. technology is going to change. As you see on this slide from NIST, our appetite for advanced technology is exceeding our ability to protect it. And so
No
you need to
kidding.
change your route. If I left today to come see you in San Francisco, there's a good chance I could hit a snowstorm in Wyoming.
Well,
Well,
changing the narrative, right? Like what we're
right.
talking about. Yeah. So,
And
okay, now you just share with us with the simple way where to start or
yeah,
how to start. Well, what is your approach? What is our approach from NetSwitch perspective? And that I'm sure that's what the listening are trying to find out all the nuggets and and all those things that we've been talking about.
one of the things that we have talked about and we believe in is automation. And it's really utilizing those automated tools as much as possible
Well,
because
aren't they expensive?
no, not everything. And not everything's expensive. And if you are selective about what you choose to use and how it's being utilized, you can be very cost effective. For instance, for our assessments to establish a baseline for a client, we use a fully automated tool. Achieves three different things essentially for them. It does a full exploitation pen test. It does configuration testing and to whatever framework or regulation they need to comply, including multiples, so we can overlay and crosswalk between all these different regulations. And it also gives an audit-ready asset inventory report. You know, when you do this, it takes out any bias of people's opinions, perspectives, capabilities, skill sets, and you use that automated tool to establish a reasonable baseline that everybody can agree to.
Yeah, I
It's just
think that
numbers don't lie.
let's talk about one of the case studies that we just did, and which is an interesting one to me because it's something that, well, this financial service company, they have
Mhm.
three operations in the nation, three different
Right,
locations. And the owner approached me and said, Stanley, I'm not sure how good we are in the compliance to FINRA
right,
in particularly. So, and it's like, yeah, our IT team is doing a good job, but are we ready? Are we actually doing the things that we should be doing? How do I know? What can I do without spending a lot of money hiring big consulting firms to evaluate the baseline, like you
yeah,
just said, Sean. So what we did is we deployed our tools, the all fully automated tools, and we don't expect everything is going to come back today because there is a human element involved.
right,
Different IT teams, different capabilities. So along the process, what we find out, oh, there are things that they should have set the configuration correctly, but they didn't. For different reasons. I wouldn't say correctly or incorrectly because we're measuring against the CIS benchmark and then we just give them a guideline. But along the way, what we find out is there are discrepancy in the technical knowledge, or again, going back into the word cognizance, among the different level of the existing IT staff. And we were able to walk them through and provide them what the benchmark should be, and then they evaluate it and implement it. It took a while. Only three locations, but it still took a little bit of time. But because and of course the owner was frustrated. He's like, how come it takes so long? I said, well, you can't really rush this type of thing. It's a journey. We got to look at it as an approach, and that leads up to our next point is safe harbor approach. Yeah, not the IRS safe harbor rules. Okay, don't worry about it. And so it is the safe harbor approach and how we managing cyber resilience, which we again go back in a little bit about the definition is the IT, the cyber security,
right.
and the governance and risk and compliance. All of those into this word called cyber resilience. And then, of course, the result of that is we're looking at the ROI, measuring the MTTD and MTTR. It's a journey along with that process. So, Sean, share
Yeah.
us your rabbit holes.
Well, I was going to say, you read those NIST documents, and what was it, 188 pages, and there's two notes for GRC. One is a footnote talking about commercial tools for tracking GRC compliance, and another was the definition of GRC. NIST does not include GRC in cyber resilience. So why do you?
So that's why the safe harbor approach is we're looking at it from a risk management perspective. But of course, we're not talking about, the enterprise risk management. We are more specifically focused on the cyber risk and cyber resilience that goes back into our, core competency in IT and cybersecurity. And now adding the element with our consultants, with lawyers, our ecosystem partners, they talk about the GRC because one key words or phase that we keep emphasizing is we have to have the separation of duties.
Right.
We cannot, even though the large consulting firms, that they still have to engage with different expertise to
Right.
do to perform their part to making sure that we have the separation of duties.
Otherwise, you have the fox watching the hen house.
Exactly. And that's why we keep on emphasizing the pie is so huge. Why are we kind of like fighting with each other?
Right.
Why can't we just get along and be unifying our effort and start approaching this together in with our safe harbor approach? So now with this risk management framework that defined by NIST, the special publications 800-37R2. So walk us through the process a little bit.
You look at this this image here, and it kind of speaks to what you and I have been talking about. It's that communication up and down the chain amongst everyone, and making sure that everyone understands the risk the organization has to deal with. And that's really what it goes to, is that communication, straightforward communication, reporting to everybody, makes everyone aware and makes everyone safer.
All right, I'm going to throw in a curveball to you.
Oh,
What is that all
fantastic.
about?
This so now my communication of making sure everyone understands has just become more complicated. So this is what one of our clients has to deal with. They have each one of these things to meet the obligations of compliance to each one of these, either from their internal GRC or from the regulations they have to comply with. So how do you measure yourself against each one of these on a daily
Well,
basis?
let
That
me make
becomes the
it simple,
complexity.
right? Yeah, let's make it simple and
And
talk about.
that's what we offer to them. Let's show you how we can make it simple.
Well, we'll start with that. Okay, now go back into the pin drop. Well, we're going to start with what Gartner had predicted.
Yeah.
75% of the world personal data will be covered under some type of privacy regulations and laws, right?
Right.
So how do we start this pin drop and the safe harbor approach? And then, the more important part is what we talked about, the acronym battle that we are dealing with. And
Tomato,
all of
tomato. Yeah.
so, I created this slide and because why I created this slide is when I was working with various organizations and go back into that client that in the global organization, they are not huge, but they have a very high demand in the cyber resilience. And so we've been working with them for almost 2 decades and looking at different aspects and keep evolving along with the cybersecurity, IT, and GRC journey. And so I summarize it. Oh my goodness, all these acronyms in that we have to deal with
Yeah.
as a business leaders. And now we're adding another part on the governance side and the GRC side, which actually becomes more of the business driving force
Hmm.
than the technology. Unfortunately, I'm a technologist, but then we always get undervalued, and because we keep saying things that is too complex and nobody understand what we're talking about, always get kicked aside, in the corporate world until, and then of course, I came up with the approach is keep nagging, right, Sean?
It's,
You've been
oh
my
my
customer for
goodness.
14 years.
14 years to listen to you nag and nag and nag.
So, well, but this is the part that, okay, we finally realize of course, it's complex. It's very difficult to translate every single nuts and kernels and, talk about it. So this acronym battle becomes a hurdle for most of the organization. I would say pretty much all of the organization, big or small. With the smaller ones, mid-sized to small, you have the human resource issues because we know there's a shortage in cybersecurity. And then the large organizations, the separation of duties, to keep the ever, evolving GRC processes. Look at this year, we got the EO
Yeah.
14028, and that involved with the SEC. That changes the landscape on how we're dealing with the cyber risk governance process.
Right.
So all of these that becomes when it comes to operational, it becomes a challenge. It becomes a problem. How do we peel an onion one by one? And going back into where we're starting on the vision, mission, objective, define the definitions, making sure that we all understand we're on the same page. And that's why we created the Unity Risk Indicator to consolidate all this data, correlate it, not everything, but as much as we can.
So where does your vision, mission, objective mean for our audience?
Well, yeah, again, I think that let's take a look at some of the case study that we work with. We are very fortunate to talk to some of the top-notch CISO in the world.
Right.
And they come back to me, Stanley, we have no resource issue. They have everything they need.
Yeah.
However, they need to find ways to improve the current processes to evolve with new regulations and technology solutions. Ah, okay. So how do we start? And then going back into, okay, why are you doing the annual audit? And one part of the annual audit, you have to do a pen test.
Right.
But isn't that pen test is so 10 years ago? I remember, when I started doing pen tests, it was like in 2006, 2007. So now, how come you're still using semi-automatic pen tests?
Right.
And this is the word that we actually survey a lot of our audience within the
Yep.
group, whether they're compliance officers or CIO, CTO, CISOs. They said they still, over half of them still preferring to use semi-automatic pen testing.
Or
Now,
hybrid. Yeah. The
hybrid.
hybrid approach.
Why? I said, why? Isn't that there are tools available fully automatic, just like where we were 17, 18 years ago when I got into the business that there were vulnerability scanning that we have to do the hybrid semi-automatic and we thought that it was great that we can make this money forever. And then a few years later, that we basically drive ourselves out of the market because we cannot afford it with our resources anymore.
Well, and that's the
And
thing is that many of the people thought they were looking at that they would use that automated VA, vulnerability assessment, and a manual engineer to do the testing for the pen test.
well, and that's go back into the point. Now you can't even find the pen tester.
Well, you
And
can
do
find
you
them. You can
even
pay a lot for them.
well, and that's another point. You pay a lot for the pen tester. And to me, I hire and terminate pen testers because that they are not reliable, unfortunately. And of course, that comes with the part of growing pain in any organization. So
Well, it's
that's
not
why then we
necessarily that they're
jump
not
into the
smart.
fully
It's that they're
automatic.
not up to date on the latest advanced techniques. The attack techniques that are out there.
Well,
They can't be up to date on everything.
let's define that a little better. I call it inconsistency.
Okay.
Right? So why
Yeah.
inconsistency? Okay, so we have a group of pen tester. We go after it. And you know, at the end of the day, a lot of cyber incidents, I think what, 85% or something like that, and a high percentage
Yeah.
that it was evolved with human errors.
Yep.
And that is the part that I define it as inconsistency from our pen tester perspective. And then from there, actually, it was one of our pen tester point to us is why not we using the fully automated pen testing
It
three
was.
years ago, 4 years ago. I said,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, yes, that makes more sense. But we still need those pen tester to look at as a now I going back into the IT like a level 2 or level 3 support. Yes, we get the fully automated pen test come back, but somebody needs to read it. Somebody needs to understand what to do with it, even though it comes with remediation recommendations. But somebody still needs to execute it to the way that how it's being interpreted, what it meaning, the deep meanings of how it relates to the network architect, how it relates to the configuration system configurations. And I think, again, going back into peeling off the onion one at a time, it needs to be based on each organization's collaborative effort in their pace, in their style, and within their capacity. And if they
Right.
don't have that capacity, that's why they start need to changing the narrative in that organizations, rather deal with it in the planning or safe harbor approach process, rather than firefighting in the everyday process. And that is the part that why we're having this elevating the cognizance conversations.
Right. So
Well, go back into it. So you're speechless, Sean.
I'm usually speechless listening to you talk.
Yeah, so let me okay, recap a little bit. So we almost into the half, an hour into this mark. It's a very broad subject. So there are three topics that we introduced today. The acronym battle, the
Right.
safe harbor approach. Now let's talk about what we wanted to, what we set out to talk about. Well, within all of these, I'm sure most of our audience now, their head is overwhelmed and reflecting what they're doing on a daily basis or strategically that what they need to do for the business leaders perspective, uh, and the technologists that they on the daily that they are in these trenches fighting every day. Oh, now also the governors, the governance, how they're dealing with the, now they're looking at that 75% and the stack of GRC. We laid out the four layers of compliance and regulatory issues.
Right.
I'm sure that their head is hurting. So that brings up to the last point that I want to talk about today is the last line of defense.
Well, that last line of defense in a lot of the conversations we've had is that cyber liability coverage from the insurance carrier, from the underwriters.
Well, I like
And
to quote one of our partner that from coming from a leadership risk management perspective, that no, 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 it's not anything else, but it's the human resource. The human talents is the last line of defense.
hmm,
So what's
well,
going on? Now we go back into where we started. Now, how can we change a new narrative? What are the results that our audience can expect?
as far as achieving in the cyber side,
Either side. Let's talk.
well, I mean, we've seen what we achieved. And here you're talking about the human element and error. Here is that human aspect. And how do you change that? It's education. It's training. It's making your employees aware. That'll improve your numbers significantly if you can make them more aware. But this human error is just the forgetfulness of humans as well. Going back to what you were talking about before, the reliability of pen testers in their ability, their capabilities. Even the network engineers, do they have the proper configurations all the time? Did they install an update to something and go back and check the configurations to make sure they were still in alignment to the GRC of the organization?
So
You know,
let's
let's talk about the controls there. So
okay.
one control on the governor's side, that equals almost 300 technical controls. That's 300 configurations that an engineer has to go back and verify on a daily basis.
Well,
So the
thank you,
governor's,
Sean.
it's a
Speaking up for
noun.
the technologists
Yeah.
now.
Well, the governors have taken on the role of becoming the know people in an organization. The technologists have had that banner for so long. But really, you look at that, it's one control is a noun for governors. They review it once a year. Now they're having to review it more frequently because interpretation of the regulations, interpretation of the law, lawsuits happen, law changes, precedence occurs. Now that interpretation that previously was held by the organization and maybe one of the auditors, the external auditors, That's now shifted a little bit. So now what does that mean? Are we still in compliance? Do we need a new control on the technical side to enforce that now on the governor's side? And so, automation is certainly the way to do this. Audit and assess your configurations, even your GRC side. Evaluate that on a constant basis. Are we updated? Are we currently compliant? Are we safe? Are we more secure than we were yesterday? So,
Well, I like the way that
yeah. So where
putting
do we
this
start?
together. Yeah, it's like
It goes
going
back
back
to where
into
do we
this
start?
point, and
This
and I
this graphic certainly illustrates many of the executives. It certainly illustrates when I was an executive and a customer in NetSwitch. Okay, you're nagging me, but where do you want me to start? And back when that was going on, there really wasn't a good way to establish a starting point. We have that now. We have an automated way to do that now.
and I think that going back into the common objectives among the three groups of stakeholders.
Right.
How do we find the cost-effective solutions to risk mitigations or risk management? Simply say selfishness saying that, hey, it's like I don't want to get fired by doing the either by doing my daily job, or from a business, organization's point of view, I don't want to get a lawsuit because of all this mounting GRC process along the way. And at the same time, how can we find the efficiency along all those processes that we talked about? And there are too many evolving components from the governance,
Mhm.
risk, compliance, interpreted into the technology solutions. And going back into the last line of defense, and that's the topic that we just covered in our podcast, and we experience new in our industry, is the cyber insurance that we should be talking about as our last line of defense rather than the human element, because we already pointed out all those human flaws that we have, or the overwhelming firefighting processes that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And even though the best the human can do, the human talent can put up with the cyber attacks, with the IT operations, there's still the evolving components from the GRC perspective that it changes or keep on evolving because it's necessary. So that's why we look at it at the last line of defense in the cyber insurance. Now, this is a very interesting observation that we had. If you are our followers and you work with NetSwitch before, there's up until last year, we were giving away cyber
Yeah.
insurance as long as you sign up on our security assessment training, awareness training,
Right.
security awareness training, right? So if you sign up in our awareness training, you're part of our managed service that we help you in the IT and cybersecurity side, along with your IT and team and vendors. We actually giving cyber insurance away. Now, all of a sudden, because of the solar wind incident, we all understand that it affected and cyber insurance company lost a lot of money. And this year, it's 180 flip.
Right.
If you buy cyber insurance, you're getting the security awareness training. So, Sean, I'm sure that you want to jump on and tell us more.
Yeah, well, I think back to 10 years ago when I was in a different business and a different industry, and I was offered a data liability policy, which is essentially the cyber liability policy. I was like, what do I need that for? I'm not spending money on that. In today's dollars was relatively cheap back then, and we've seen it was relatively cheap up until about 2 years ago. And then, as you said, solar winds happened, and we all started working from home during the pandemic, and the ransomware attacks increased, and insurance companies went from paying out very little to now paying out all the time. And so recently, we were with a client who was trying to get a cyber liability policy, and one of the carriers, one of the underwriters, was essentially, if you answer no to any one of these questions on this page, you're denied. And it was shocking how quickly they were turning to us saying, okay, get us to do these things. What do we have to do to get answer yes on all this stuff?
Yeah, and
And
dive down a little bit deep involved. I didn't get involved too much of it, but I understand the process now. I'm comparing to like 4 or 5 different cyber insurance
right,
requirement to go through, to help our audience to go through that process as what we refer as the last line of defense. Now, dive down a little bit into it, and then that's where our insurance partners had come to us. Hey, Stanley, it's like some insurance company is just going to throw it into it because they actually focus in other type of insurance, not
right.
cyber insurance or cyber risk insurance. So when our audience needs to comparing to the policies that they are there, of course, that I'm not going to be saying it like an insurance expert in here,
Yeah, we're not
because that we require our partner to do their separation of duties. However, those are the when it comes to comparing to the policies, some of them just, from when the time I got involved is saying, okay, you got this policy A, B, and C different, from 3 companies offering. The A company might give you a lower price, but what is your deductible, right?
right,
And at the same time, how much time that they give you to fix all these IT or cyber insurance, cyber security or GRC issues.
right.
And one of go back into the case that we even have this MFA deployed to our customers, but because of the internal pushbacks, and
It's
they
too
don't
hard.
want to deploy,
It slows
it's
me
too
down.
complicated.
I don't
They don't even
understand it.
want to deploy the MFA. So as an cyber resilience vendor, and they say, okay, if the management doesn't want to enforce it, what can we do as an IT technologist? How can we enforce it? So that goes back into the policies that nope, now you have to do it. In fact, that you
That's
only got
right,
14 days for your entire organization to self-attest to this compliance topic.
right.
Now, there are another example is okay, now this company is going to require an app that one of the member within the organization needs to download so we can track your cyber incidents when as it happens.
Right.
So who's going to do that? If you're a small organization, well, at the end of the day, all of these type of processes that goes back into the liability issue to the management, which ties in another element of this last line of defense, is because now your director and
That's
officers
right.
policies,
Your
your
DNOs.
error and omissions policies, it doesn't matter what industry that you are in, part of it related to cyber risk insurance. Now,
That's right.
again, driving from this topic of cyber insurance or GRC as a business driving force, that it forces the organization to start changing the narrative, how they're going to discuss with your IT team and governors. And now, as I am predicting the next thing is going to happen is the SIM that we've been talking about for years. What is a SIM? It's the Security Information Events Management tool that the insurance company eventually going to have it as a real time
Yep.
tracking those cyber incidents and making sure the organization it's meeting their underwriting process, their constant changing requirement. And if you don't qualify because they can see that you're not meeting their requirement, they're going to cancel the policy.
Are
Okay,
they gonna go
mark my
back
word.
are they gonna go back when there's an incident, you ask for a claim? Are they gonna go back and look at all those logs and say, "Well, you were being alerted here and here and here. Why weren't you doing anything to respond to it? Why weren't you
And
resolving these issues? You were
go back
told."
into, yeah, go back into that. On top of that, the banking. They
Mhm.
got 72 hours
Yep.
to respond to any data breach. So is your organization ready? Well, you can say that I'm not a bank. I don't need that. But again, as time progressing, that most of these processes or compliance requirements it's going to be demanded because of the cyber insurance. Now, you can go back and say, well, I don't need cyber insurance. Well, good for you. You can rest, you rest peacefully for now.
I think there's several organizations that were hit with a cyber incident that are now out of business that wish they had cyber liability coverage
Yeah, I think that
to at
that
least absorb some
scare
of the financial
tactic has
impact.
been long gone, Sean. The
Well, that's true,
fear.
but you would think so, but ransomware attacks and everything else still happen to organizations. It's just we hear about all the big ones in the news.
But I think the most important part are the stakeholders paying attention.
Yeah,
We've been, well, you don't need to go too far. Just Google it. How many cyber incidents happening on a daily basis around the world, and how does it affect? So I just read another one today. I get numb on all those
yeah,
news, and that's why we don't want to talk about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt type of
true.
processes. Is going back into the last line of defense. Where do we start? And then, of course, now a lot of people can argue with me and say, okay, well, the last line of defense is a triage process. It's the technology, people, and process.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've been talking about this for years. Again, what is the defense in depth? How do we approach it? And we keep saying back, going back into, look, if people are confused with the process, and now there are so many misleading technology solutions,
hmm,
or has been so many misleading technology solutions, because I've been advocating, yeah, the technology company are doing a fantastic job on misleading with their marketing process. Today is this, and tomorrow they call that, just like what I said in the beginning of the process. Started with network security and then become cybersecurity. Is cybersecurity two words, or is cybersecurity one word? Does it mean anything different? Then go back into what we just talked about, as the cyber insurance will become our last line of defense for the survivability for an organization after a data breach or ransomware attack. And that's another interesting topic by itself. The ransomware attack is how many company has the Bitcoin ready if
yeah,
they are willing to pay. And that's also part of the evaluation process when you go and acquire a cyber insurance. Is your cyber insurance company able to or willing to pay those Bitcoin to get your data to recover? And of course, there's no free lunch, right? So you're thinking those, yeah, they might be, the cyber insurance may be having those Bitcoin ready to recover, but eventually it's going to add into the cost of your cyber insurance or your organization's cyber insurance costs. So it goes back into the cost justification process. And that's why that there are more regulations and compliance. Yes, we might not like it as a technologist. Oh my goodness, another regulations. But at the same time, because that the human element, the human flaws that we're facing every day, that I kind of understand why there's more laws and more regulations, more data privacy requirements, and eventually the data sovereignty requires by different geographic area, by
right,
different type of industry. And as we moving towards this direction, now quantum computing become part of the element. Of course, AI has been around at the same time, but I just saw it. Quantum computing is now it's adding into this element. Although, yeah, it's going to be decades away from what I understand, but nevertheless, that we're going back into changing the narrative. And just like the cyber insurance, they changed it in the 180% within the last year, from we are giving out away cyber insurance to the today that they are giving us security awareness training. And no matter what, go back into your point, which is the fact, is not a FUD. And the fact is, cyber attack continue to increase because
right,
there are money into it.
right.
Now, there are more elements that human talents in the industry, technologists have to keep on evolving. And at the same time, the triage, the technology keep evolving. The process needs to keep evolving. Now, go back into where do we start? And from the starting point, relying on the cyber insurance as our last line of defense, let's just put it this way for now.
Well, you go back to what you were talking about with the last line of defense with the cyber liability. It's not just a cyber attack. With the growing number of regulations, you could be out of conformance to a cyber regulation or a data privacy law. If you were to have an incident, even an insider incident, something is done improperly with data, consumer data, you could be hit with a lawsuit from the regulating authority, a fine, a penalty. That cyber liability is going to cover that as well, typically. But you have to have these things in place. So while the regulations are there to start putting more emphasis on protecting the data, protecting your structure, your networks, then how do you do that? How do you go about doing those things? Well, you start putting the policies and procedures in place. It's not difficult to do that. You have employment policies and procedures. When you hire new employees, you have a way to do that. You have a way to engage them as new employees and bring them into the organization and teach them what they're supposed to do and not do. Same kind of thing goes on with all your policies and procedures related to company data, customer data, company devices, the company network. What do you do? What do you not do? And if something happens, what do? You report it. Those things are there. Cyber insurance is there when something happens because accidents happen, mistakes happen, humans are error prone. So it comes back to where do you start? You start
Well,
with
you sound like
understanding.
me now
I
nagging.
know you, but really, it's going back to just like where we talked about before. Find out where you are. Find out where your organization sits today, not from what your staff are telling you, your managed IT vendor is telling you. Your managed IT guys are not your cybersecurity guys. Your cybersecurity guys are not your managed IT guys. They're two separate functions. Find out where you are. Find out in a reasonable assessment, honest assessment. You may not like the results. Going back to our customer we were talking about before, I don't think he's going to really be thrilled with the information we come back to him on where they are today. But it's an honest assessment. Then craft your path forward. Look at how you go forward. Establish those budgets. Understand what your cyber liability will cover. Find out what regulation or framework you want to achieve in a reasonable time frame. It's not going to happen in 90 days. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen in 180 days. But start that path
Well,
and start
changing the
that path forward.
narrative, and this is the perfect time, it's the pivoting time, I should say. It's the pivoting time to change the narrative. And yes, I got to drop in this sales pitch. It's like, okay, this is the security assessment that we talked about, go with the pen testing, system configuration assessments, and align them, those technical findings and
Yeah.
gaps and holes with the regulations and compliance. And then look at it from the access point of view or access management point of view and put them onto a single console environment and risk indicator environment and change the narrative among yourself.
It changes the
Uh,
conversation amongst those stakeholders. They're all speaking the same language. They're all looking at the same information.
then that's what we're talking about in the communications part of it is to look at the three simple questions which we use years of our expertise and narrow it down into this how do we start the communication with these three questions, right? What compliance and regulation does your company need? Okay, you might say that, well, I don't need anything because you are a small business, as I heard that many times, so I'm getting bored with that. It's not true, because even though that you are dealing with small company, I'm in California now. California Consumer Privacy
Right.
Act, whether you like it or not, it's going to impact company like construction companies, because that they are helping their clients, and one of them as an example, they help their client to put in low voltage the wiring process for data centers, for
Mhm.
stadiums, and these type of things that will affect the supply chain risk
Right.
when they were building that stadiums. And there were a checklist of things that they need to answer or self-attest. So they didn't think that they need to comply into regulations, but because their client is in the sensitive area, they need to comply to some type of regulations, and that is why they need to be complied with them as
Yeah,
the supply chain vendor.
that third
So
and fourth
that's,
party risk.
yeah, third and fourth party risk, and that we haven't even covered a lot on.
Right.
And that's why we even have partners to focus on third party, fourth party risk assessment to making sure we are doing our job.
Mhm.
So that's where number one is going. Now, the second one is, do you have you know, the manage IT, or do you have resource, we should say? Do you have the resource to manage IT plus cybersecurity plus GRC? And we know that the human resources or the talents are very hard to find, and they varies. The level of expertise varies. So you cannot even hire all those experts to cover everything. And I said that earlier too. Even though Fortune 100 company, they still needs to have consultants, third party risk, and third party, fourth party risk assessors to do the separation of duties, to perform their separation of
Right.
duties, to become more holistic in our safe harbor approach is the holisticness.
And again, it's an unbiased opinion from an outside party
Well,
of what
thank you,
you're doing,
Sean.
how compliant you are.
Right. So then it brings down to the third question. Well, yeah, I have all the money in the world. You are the lucky one. But at the same time that we have met with a few of those worldwide CISOs that, yeah, they literally they have all the money in the world.
Yeah.
We're not going to say the name of that CISO, but they have all the money in the world, and but they still want to improve their process. They still want to look into what is next. What is the next step? And that's part of how we're changing the narrative, starting the communications. And from the communications, we use data to collaborate
Right.
rather than just, oh, this person do that person do that. Oh, yeah, I have done that. No, we have not done that. Stop the acronym battle and start using data to communicate and to collaborate. And that's how we starting the journey into risk mitigation and eventually increasing and enhancing your cyber resilience.
Yeah, and improving that ROI. We talk about the numbers don't lie, and in the more the more data points you have to measure your progress in a new way, is going to help you make the case of where your budget is being spent. Even if you're a small business, you want to be able to justify to yourself that you're spending the money the right way. You don't have unlimited amounts of money to spend on things. So am I getting the best bang for my buck? And, you know, be able to measure the efficacy of your spend, the effectiveness of your spend, regardless of the size of the organization, helps everyone understand that money is important and how we spend the money is important. As long as we're protecting the organization, are we getting the most out of it? And that's, we talk ourselves into a full circle here, Stanley, but we get back to how do you
Well, by saving
demonstrate?
money, which business doesn't want to save money, right? But buyers also have plenty of choices. And one part of we keep talking about, and actually we been executed for 15 or actually almost 20 years is with open source solutions.
Yeah.
And we've been, if people know me, I talked about PF Sense or even into my prior life being a unify or convergence network architect and consultant and helping company to deploy, to change from the analog world to the digital world in the telecommunication side. We have been deployed asterisk telecommunication
Yep.
systems for decades now, almost 2 decades now. So, boy, I'm old.
Yeah, well,
But
you said
people,
it.
well,
Fortunately, you said
hold
it. I
on.
didn't have to.
Yeah, hold on. One thing is like people keep asking me, well, how safe is, open source tools? How safe is open source solutions that, in our security environment, in our network? And this question have been asked for many years. Yes, there are flaws in every single software out there in the world. And you can
True.
say that I said it, but it's just how fast you detect those flaws, security incidents, and how fast you resolve them. Rather than go back into Sean, your favorite commercials, yo, I am a security guard. I'm letting you know your bank is being robbed right now, but hey, I'm just a security guard. I'm not doing anything about it.
I'm just
And that's
telling you.
why most of the vendor call them a respawn.
Right.
We don't just respond, we resolve. And of course that we don't have all the resources, human talent to resolve them for you, even though you hire us and try
No,
to get us engaged. But
that's why we
that's
built
why
an
we go back,
ecosystem.
well, separation of duties at the same time,
Yeah,
right? And then and I got to throw in, well, go back into the point that who doesn't want to be cheap and buying superstars, right? From the business perspective, I think that is going back into every company needs to evaluate their pace, their style, their capacity in order to come in putting together a holistic approach, and then look at where they can save money, right? I air quote save money is because that there are ways to engage with the gig economy model,
that's
the
right.
fractional engagement,
We're seeing
and
that now with more professional services, not just somebody deliver your shopping stuff from the grocery store, but the professional services.
again, yeah, the professional services, I use the model like LegalZoom. It's like back
Mm.
then we all thought that, wow, hiring lawyers is crazily expensive. But there's LegalZoom, right? So that's where we are in the platform as a service. We help you to start, well, we create an unbiased, so we work with any kind of technology and fully automated assessment, security and risk assessment, and go back into my sales pitch a little bit. Then it goes into start looking at the communications, where the gaps and holes, how can we collaborate, what can we do together with your third party consultants, IT vendors. And this is where we're filling in the gaps. Hey, maybe after we're done with the assessment, like what we talked about, the financial service company, their consultant take over from there. Great. Because, well, we asked the question, how come you didn't do that yesteryear or
Yeah,
yestermonth? Well, how come you only start doing that after we engage with this assessment? Interesting, isn't that? Well, anyway, I'm not going to say out the answer, but it happens all the time. But because of the compliant, the GRC, that it forces this type of communications to start today
right.
and to look at the unbiased assessment, to look at the gaps, pin drop where you are today, moving the communications towards collaborations, and then towards enhancing cyber resilience with fractional engagement to meet the budget.
Right. Rely upon those people that specialize in certain areas. You can't be experts in everything, and using that fractional engagement with people to bring their expertise, their specialty into your organization and to help collaboratively work from different angles to achieve that cyber resilience is important. It's the best way to stretch your dollars. The open source is certainly another way to do it. You have internal resources to manage open sources, awesome. If not, there's people like NetSwitch out there to do it for you. We have a lot of years of experience doing that. We can do it more simply than you can try to learn it on your own. And we know
Time
how
is
to
up,
fit it in.
Sean.
Oh,
So
now you're going to kill
let's,
me.
yeah. So I think the last thing that we're just going to say, well, if you want us to show you how to reduce your MTTD and MTTR, mean time to detection and mean time to resolution,
Resolution, not
to
respond,
meet the
resolution.
cyber resilience objectives, let us know. You saw the QR code on the bottom, or contact us at info@netswitch.net. info@netswitch, one word, netswitch.net.
Or you can listen to our podcast, Cybersecurity Chronicles, or join us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation of the Cyber Risk Governance LinkedIn group, the number
That's
one group
right.
of cyber risk and governance.
Join us in our group and see you there. And we'll continue our sharing and the insights of cyber resilience. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you all. Bye bye.